Howdy. Good evening. And yeah, gonna do another review. Switching things up just barely. Focusing on Jrobin again. And this is one that I wanted to get to. I think this one's a couple, 3 weeks old. And it's Jrobin talking to Billy, who's an Australian guy who's decently active on Clubhouse. And these guys have had run-ins before. So I'm just going to go over this one. I think Clubhouse Debates has titled the video Jrobin v. Billy Presuppositional Fail. So yeah, I mean, the spoilers kind of right up front. But anyway, good evening to everybody in the live chat. JC Knott, Jack Burton, Alex Baptista, John Fapiano. Good to see you, John. 8:30 to Awesome. AJ, always good to see you. Spooky Bed Hair. Spooky is always watching. Well, let's see. Manny Perez, good to see you. Let's make sure I'm not missing anybody. Joseph Kano, good to see you. Tyler West. And Justin. Thank you all for checking in live. And Megalite Jack and Qzorp one. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, maybe. I'm going live at the same time that friend of the show and fellow Discord bi-monthly Christian atheist provocateur Randolph Richardson is currently on Modern Day Debate in a debate with a guy named Samir. I think the discussion is on does atheism cause secular decay or something like that. I don't know. It's weird. So that's going on. So I don't expect if that draws a big crowd, I don't expect to have too many viewers. Reckonator, silky smooth audio tonight. Well, I'm glad it's sounding better than it was. Let me take a listen and find out. Silky smooth audio tonight. Yeah, it actually is processing okay. I had my brother was in here earlier before I went live, and I was asking him, and I think it must be the way it's like going over his phone. He was saying that it didn't sound all that hot, but it is broadcasting better. So yeah, I had to get a little adapter, and this is actually just a cheap Logitech headset, but it does sound better than those Bluetooth ones. Warren OB1000 is here. Good to see you. Clubhouse Debates is here. Always good to see you. Thank you. Founder of the feast, so to speak. Scott Duke, thanks for showing up. How you doing? All right, so yeah, there's not too much to really preface this with. Jrobin and Billy, I think, get into. I thought this was going to be kind of like a problem of evil kind of conversation. At least I thought that's what this originally was, but it's not. I think they're just kind of getting into like grounding and that kind of stuff. What Jrobin kind of gets into in here kind of sounds like, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with another YouTube apologist kind of. I think he's more enthusiastic about talking about Calvinism, specifically Christianity in general, but Veckel. But Veckel is not great at debating this kind of stuff. And I don't think he puts himself out there to be like he doesn't really, I don't think really argues. He doesn't pretend to be like into philosophy and stuff, but then he'll kind of like grab onto kind of certain theological or apologetic motives that are part of philosophy, and then try and throw them around. And this one, Jrobin, is actually starting to sound more like Veckel. So, all right. Okay, let me pull this up. And let's get started. Usual rules apply. Let me know if the sound's not working. Let me make sure that it's actually turned up all the way. It is. Okay, let's get started.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not speaking meaning.
That's not good. It sounds like the sound is not coming through. It sounds like it's trying to come off. Let's play this a little bit more. Everybody let me know how quiet that is.
Okay, because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing. And another one. Okay.
Yeah, that's not working right. So, good old StreamYard audio settings. What a pile of crap. Audio. Okay. So, let's try sharing the screen out again.
You're on a short leash as well, Billy. You're on stage. Go ahead.
Um, well, I was wondering if you formalized an argument for like Christianity or something like that. Because I
Yeah.
wasn't like tracking, like I wasn't tracking the argument the last time. So like, if you have like, I don't know,
Yeah, we just talked about
premises or
this.
conclusion or something.
Yeah, we just talked about this. We're talking about a being that's ultimate, that secures all.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why this is causing a problem, but for whatever reason, um, when I had somebody on here, their sound was coming through, but when I'm trying to share sound out, it's not playing through the tab anymore. So, all right, I think I might have to sacrifice my own sound in order to continue on. Let me rewind this a little bit and see what happens if I do this. All right, I'm probably going to sound pretty canny at this point, so I apologize for that. But for whatever reason, StreamYard is only recognizing 50% of the headset that I threw on, so I have no idea what that's talking about. But all right, let's try sharing this now and see. I don't even know how the sound is going to work on this thing, but we'll see how it broadcasts. All right, let's give this a whirl.
Formalized an argument for like Christianity or something like that.
We're
like tracking, I wasn't tracking the argument the last time. So like, you have like, I don't know.
Sounds like that's working, right?
Because I wasn't like tracking, I wasn't tracking the argument the last time. So like, you have like, I don't know.
Yeah, we just talked about this.
Or conclusion or something.
Yeah, we just talked about this. Talking about a being that's ultimate, that secures all intelligibility, rationality, knowledge, etc. That's ultimate, omniscient, omnipotent, always truth revealing. These are the properties, essential properties of the Christian God that are essential to him.
And what's the argument that that being exists?
Yeah, because the fact that a being is revelatory, or let's start with the fact that it's ultimate and eternal. That is a required characteristic of being ultimate, or sorry, of being of securing intelligibility and rationality. Because in a world wherein such a thing does not exist, first of all, such a thing wouldn't be possible because everything that is putative or putatively exists, or any putative state of affairs that could be invoked, would be born out of absolutely nothing. It would just be.
All right, hang on just a second while I check on this here real quick. Let me rewind this and take a listen to what that sounds like.
Ability, rationality, knowledge, etc.
That sounds like absolute ass. Okay. For fuck's sake. Yeah. This is not working out. Okay. This is probably going back. Because this is not a solution to anything. Every time I try to do anything with this thing, the audio just sounds like crap. So yeah, I don't know why StreamYard's not sharing out the audio. It only has like 6 different options. Is there echo cancellation on the audio setting? Yeah, and that's actually turned on. Yeah, it's on. This hasn't been a problem. The weird thing is that this hasn't been a problem with the Bluetooth earpieces that I've been using. It's just the Bluetooth earpieces don't sound great. So I do have one of those. Let's see if I can actually give that a whirl. All right. All right, cool. I don't know if I'm still coming through. Let me know if this is sounding weird. I'm going to try to adjust some of the settings here. I'm going to stop sharing there, go into settings, see if we can get this to work. Of course, it's not switching over. Try it now. Okay. Can anyone know if, anyone let me know if that's working okay? I probably will sound like I'm coming out of a tin can. So if I sound like I'm coming out of a tin can, that means it's working. All right, so now that I've got that on, I should be able to share this out. Repeat. This back. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. But, wrong one. All right, let's see what it sounds like.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not speaking meaningfully about anything, okay? Because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing.
And another one. Okay. You're on a short leash as well, Billy. You're on stage. Go ahead.
Well, I was wondering if you like formalized an argument for like Christianity or something like that. Because I wasn't like tracking. I wasn't tracking the argument the last time. So like, if you have like, I don't know.
Have we just talked about this?
Or conclusion or something.
Yeah, we just talked about this. We're talking about a being that's ultimate, that secures all intelligibility, rationality, knowledge, etc. That's ultimate, omniscient, omnipotent, always truth revealing. These are the properties, essential properties of the Christian God that are essential to him.
And what's the argument that that being exists?
Yeah, because the fact that a being is revelatory, or let's start with the fact that it's ultimate and eternal. That is a required characteristic of being ultimate, or sorry, a being of securing intelligibility and rationality. Because in a world wherein such a thing does not exist, first of all, such a thing wouldn't be possible, because everything that is putatively exists, or any putative state of affairs that could be invoked, would be born out of absolutely nothing. It would just be spontaneous, random, without any rhyme or reason whatsoever. Okay, in such a world, again, where there is no ultimate foundation, which is one of the properties of the Christian God, then it would not exist. And by it, I'm saying knowledge, rationality, that kind of thing, etc. Right? That God grounds, and that He's a prerequisite for him. Okay, you understand that?
Oh, sorry, I just closed the app down for a sec. Yeah.
Did you hear what I said?
Hey, what's that? So there has to be some like being that's ultimate, because that the being will be the source of things that are possible and impossible, and whatever is possible or impossible is made true in virtue of that being.
Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, I'm trying to recapitulate.
I didn't invoke the word possibility and what I just said.
Okay, well maybe you can repeat. Sorry, I'm doing two
things at once. When we're talking about a being that's ultimate, I'm gonna lay this out very clearly for you, okay? When we say that God is ultimate, okay, when we say that God is eternal, we're saying that God is the source and basis of all things, okay? All things derive and depend upon him.
I can get that from ultimate. I don't really get that from eternal. Nothing about something being eternal necessarily entails that it's the foundation for anything, really. Other than I think Jrobin likes to throw it around, well, this thing, because this thing is eternal, it also has these other kick-ass traits going for it too, which, okay, but the trick here is that Jrobin really is he's arguing for a necessarily existing God. And then all the properties that he's laying out when someone's asking him to define what that being is, it sort of follows from that all of those properties are necessary too. So, okay, the fact that it's the foundation for everything comes from it is fine. I really don't know how that's any different than just a brute fact, but I don't think Jay Robin likes it when somebody brings that up. So, and I don't know if Billy does.
And he's going to be the metaphysical starting point or metaphysical basis for all things. Okay. The reason why that's required, we can take a look at the consequence of that not being the case, and establish that God is transcendently necessary in order for the things that we're talking about to be the case.
That part doesn't make any sense. The notion that God is transcendentally necessary, that's almost a meaningless expression, right? Like the transcendental argument for God is essentially stipulating that we have these things that are transcendental, these things we can't really take into account for in an empirical or purely rational way, like the existence of morality, beauty, truth, goodness, these kinds of things. So we need something that provides for those things as some kind of absolute, these are universals. Okay, but that doesn't make God transcendentally necessary. He's just necessary. Adding that transcendentally part to it is kind of an unnecessary. That's just not. It lacks explanatory power.
If there was no such thing, if there was no ultimate metaphysical starting point, metaphysical grounding, that such thing were not to be, that everything that could be stated to have exist, and I put that in quotes, okay, as if there were any states of affairs that could have come into existence, any and every state of affairs under that kind of a worldview in that metaphysical void would be born out of chance, would be born out of randomness. There would be.
How does he know that? So this is where it starts sounding like Vekalism, right? So this, and anybody please correct me if I'm wrong on this once I get into this explanation here, but AJ, yeah, he's also playing fast and loose with what an essential property is. Yeah, I think when he starts talking about essential properties, to me it just seems like he's trying to say that God's essential properties are necessary, right? If one of those properties are missing, then we're no longer talking about a God. But those are also claims, because if he tries to say that one of those essential properties would be like an omni property, you could end up getting into, you could argue infinitely about what, the entailments just contained, within trying to wrestle with the concept of omniscience. So, but yeah, what I think he's essentially doing here, Jay Robin, is what he's starting to set up. This really isn't any different than something I've heard from Deckel, right? Where and from a lot of Christians, like they're like, there's only two possibilities. There's a God world and a not God world, right? And all, props where props are due. Darth has helped kind of speed that, has helped spread that like a virus, like monkeypox through this population. So like, well, there's only two choices: a God world and a not God world. And a God world provides for intelligibility and an account for all these things, and a telos, a reason for why these things exist. God made them for purposes. And so we get that. Option two, the not God world, all this stuff exists. It's meaningless, it's random, it's accidental, and it's useless or pointless, right? That's not necessary. Like, in order to have the second part, you had to presume the first one. So the two choices that you have, they don't entirely track. It's like, oh, you've only got two. One with the God that explains the good things that we have, and it's all going somewhere, and it all makes sense ultimately somehow, and it's all for a reason. And then the other one where none of that applies. It's just chaos, random chance, nihilism, whatever. Okay. I don't see how the absence of a God, like now the absence of the God that they're defining, okay, maybe, but the absence of a higher power or some kind of, like, let's say it's somebody who's a pantheist and just believes that the brute fact is the universe and not an ultimate being that created everything. I don't know why that would necessarily lead to all of these supposed negatives being in place, that there's no point to it. Everything's like the idea that these guys just brutally equate chance with accidents is bizarre. Like the fact that the fact that humans exist is accidental. No, it's not accidental. If it's by chance, then it could be random,
but that's not an accident. An accident implies that somebody intended to do something and then fucked it up. The accidental humans are what exists now, according to Christian theology. We were created for the garden, and then Adam and Eve fucked it up, right? So, anyway, starting to get into a tangent. Let's go.
No rhyme or reason fundamentally as to how or why anything is at all. Okay, and so that would destroy intelligibility, causality, etc. Because things like causality, continuity, relationships between facts depends upon there being preconditions and that there is something that's foundational that is tying it together.
Do you have like a premises and conclusion so I can like get it sort of like
Did you understand what I just said?
clear in my mind?
Did you understand what I just said?
I mean, it seems like an appeal to consequence. Like if you're saying that there has to be something.
It's not an appeal to consequence.
Otherwise,
it's not an appeal to consequence. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm asking, or what I'm establishing here? That there needs to be something that's foundational and ultimate in order for there to be intelligibility and knowledge and rationality, etc. Because rationality depends upon preconditions, like the fact that there is continuity, relationships between facts or states of affairs, causality, etc. If those things exist, right?
How do these guys account for causality, intelligibility and these kinds of things during hallucinations or during delusions? Because they accept that those happen. They even accept in a theological sense that people can be led, they can be deceived by deceiving spirits, or evil forces can make them think that something is real when it's not, right? They have the capacity for this intelligibility, but that can be hijacked by the forces of evil. So I'm not exactly sure that it's such a great idea to just say, well, you know what? The fact that we have the capacity to understand things, or we have sense perception, that in and of itself is just proof for God. Is it though? Because it's also proof of the devil too. So I don't know that that's actually working out for you, right? Now, usually the go-to is just to escape back into a definitional game and say, well, God would never deceive you. All right. But how would you know? Right? Epistemologically, you couldn't know if you were being deceived or not, but by a being like that, right? That being could take steps to deceive you in such a way that you thought what was being revealed to you was 100% legit. Right. And when that gets brought out, they're like, yeah, but that's not how God operates. Now, Satan could try, but because Satan's the father of lies. And then you end up running into the exact same. Well, to what extent can Satan make me think that that's genuinely what's happening? And then watch them back away from that, right? Like, and so some people will just never get out from under that spell. And then you could just bring up, well, shouldn't the Holy Spirit be getting people out from under that? Well, not if the person wants it. But the person's wants and desires are being colored by the fact that their intelligibility has been hijacked by delusions coming from the evil one. Shouldn't then they, now their desires are misguided, right? And if they're choosing beliefs, right? A lot of these Christians believe this, you choose what you believe because you can withhold your belief. Well, are people withholding belief because the reality and the intelligibility of the things around them has been hijacked? I really don't know if these guys, I don't understand why these guys don't have imaginations. And by the way, howdy, J.L. Warren, thanks for joining us.
Then there's going to be something that's foundational and fundamental that is going to provide the background or the foundation upon which those things stand, right? Because
but that doesn't matter, right? Like the foundation thing is separate from the thing that the other thing that this is really fucked up. The fact that it's foundational and then establishes everything is okay. That's one thing, right? But anybody could basically, any deist could essentially say that. Well, we've got this foundational being of great power that puts things into existence, and then it just fucks off someplace, right? Well, if it just kind of squirms away and maybe it just keeps doing that, it just keeps kind of like, pooping out universes all throughout the cosmos. Okay. You have a foundation for it, right? But for Jrobin, there's two claims going on here. You have something that creates and then sustains. So it provides for this kind of world. And so the one argument that you could probably challenge some of these guys with, like, how did you make the distinction between intelligibility needing to be grounded in a foundational being, or does it need to be grounded in a foundational plus sustaining being? Because that, as far as I can tell, has not been established. And until they could establish that, I don't know why a deistic God or like a pantheistic type of explanation couldn't just serve that, right? Because all you have to do is just assert that as a well, this is, you know, as a brute fact. This is where we stop, and this is where everything terminates, and this is the beginning of everything. And then the reason it kicks off like this is we're just ants in an ant colony, right? Everybody's following a scent trail, everybody's reacting to everybody else. It's just, you know, it's a domino effect. It's a Rube Goldberg device. It's just, you know, it's been set in motion. That explains it foundationally, right? That's not enough for Jrobin and company, right? And they've said this before. They said it's the God that founded the universe and sustains it. So where's the argument for the sustaining part?
Otherwise, if that were not the case, then what we'd be left with is a world wherein everything that happens emanates out of chaos or out of a metaphysical vacuum, wherein there are these.
Well, let's think about that. Couldn't you just say that everything emanates out of chaos? I mean, in ancient Near Eastern myth, right? Chaos, especially in the Enuma Elish, right? There's chaos, which is Tiamat, right? And it's personified by a dragon, but it's also this kind of chaotic water force. And the other gods end up doing battle with it, led by Marduk, and he ends up slaying the beast, and then he creates the world out of Tiamat's carcass, out of chaos. I can't remember what it's called, but there was this idea that there was sort of the realm that we live in, and then there's the realm of the gods, which is this sort of, even though we have gods like Marduk and stuff like that, there's still this kind of weird like ether, like an upside down that still exists where forces can come and go. I can't remember what they called that. I'll have to watch those lectures again from Professor Hayes. But anyway, um, the idea here is that, well, couldn't somebody just say that the universe in and of itself is the not even really the cause of itself? It just always was. I guess for Jrobin, that's equivalent of saying, well, you're just invoking chaos. That's another claim that they make that I don't understand how they're getting a connection to. Like, I mean, all you need is a starting point. You need something to kick things in motion. So if it's a deistic God, if it's pantheism, it's something like this. If it's chaos, right? Out of chaos, this incidental universe is created, and like a bunch of dominoes kind of falling over. Yeah, it's random. It's purely by chance. But invoking chaos and saying that it just, well, that couldn't happen. But an eternal God could. If we're talking about eternity and a lack of space, a lack of time, or, you know, in enough infinities, yeah, actually something like that could happen an infinite number of times. So again, Jrobin, not exactly sure what you're positing here, but everything that I'm hearing so far that he's saying at Billy is just claim, 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 claim. And usually if he makes a claim, he's like, well, it has to be this because otherwise it would be bad. It has to be God because otherwise it would be chaos. It has to have a purpose because otherwise it would be useless or pointless. And it has to be this God because he's good. Otherwise it would be this thing, which is evil. Like, none of this makes a lot of rational sense.
These states of affairs that come in and or out of existence that have no relation or connectivity between any other states of affairs. Okay? Only in a world wherein there is a foundational basis by which everything else exists, okay, can there and will there be continuity, relationships, etc.
Which you can have continuity in relationships even in delusional states.
Okay. So, oh shit, I've only got like, I guess 15 minutes. Can I just ask a few questions?
Did you understand what I said?
I think most of it, yeah. I just
Okay, do you accept what I said?
Yeah, sure, whatever. Can I ask a question?
We're not going to play that game. Do you accept what I said? Yes or no?
Yes, I accept what you said. Can I ask a question or two?
Okay.
Do you
Go ahead.
deny that there are brute facts?
Brute facts that have absolutely no attestation or explanation at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is derivative and dependent upon God.
So
I don't really know that that's the brute fact. I think the brute fact is God.
there are some facts. So every fact, everything that occurs has some explanation. Is that it?
They're not necessarily external explanations, but God, I don't know if I'd say God explains himself, but God is simply that which is foundational and the anchor point. So there's no outside realm that God exists within.
Sure. Okay.
So God would not be considered some like brute fact, as though
what
he exists
explains-
within an external metaphysical context.
Sure.
Wait,
What
what did you say?
That God exists within.
Sure. Okay.
So God would not be considered some like brute fact,
Why wouldn't he be considered a brute fact?
as though
What
he exists
explains-
within an external metaphysical context.
Sure.
So because he exists in an external metaphysical context, he's not a brute fact. But when one of us attempts to invoke the existence of that God, that would be a brute fact. Like, I'm not sure that there's much of a distinction being made here. Like, well, God's not a brute fact. Yeah, but when we talk about him, he would be. Because epistemologically, we're limited. It could be the case that God's actually real. But when we're talking about it, the way that we talk about it, we end up having to talk about something that that is essentially arbitrary. It has no explanation for its existence. It simply is. And I don't think that's a controversial way of saying it, because these guys will usually say, well, God is ase. That's just a fancy way of saying he simply is. He's self-explanatory, self-attesting, self-authenticating, is self-attesting and self-authenticating a brute fact? Yeah, that would be part of that ase thing that would make God a brute fact. Right. I mean, it would almost be splitting hairs here. Like, well, you have to acknowledge that this God is real. Yeah, but no. If I'm not convinced that it's real and we're talking about it for the sake of the discussion, we're talking about God as a brute fact, unless you know him. And even then, even if you could know him, because he's ultimate, you couldn't verify him. So you'd still have to accept him as a brute fact.
Explains God's desire to create the universe in such a way that it is.
He does.
So God explains his own desire.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not sure if that's like an explanation. I mean,
Okay.
if I say that.
Yeah, that's just the same thing as saying, well, God wants what God wants. And who's to know? Right. And the reason he wants what he wants is because he's God.
Sort of like
I mean, if you're going to ask me like the inner workings of God's mind, I can't answer those kind of questions for you, unfortunately. But baseline, God is going to be the source of all of his actions, and in fact, because I hold to divine simplicity, I would say that God's actions are identical to himself. So
okay, I remember why I was interested in this one. This one gets fucked up. Keep in mind what he just said there. God's actions are identical to himself.
Sure, I mean,
God is God. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, for example, I'm looking at a tree right now, and presumably God created the universe such that there was a tree that I'm looking at, rather than not a tree that I'm looking at, or rather than two trees I'm looking at, because I'm looking at one tree. And God presumably had that desire for that tree to be there rather than not be there. So it just seems like there has to be, if you're saying there are no brute facts, then there has to be something that explains.
God is identical to his desires. Okay, so all of those things,
Okay. So if anybody's been keeping score, God is identical to his actions, and God is identical to his desires. And what can we gain from that? What can be extrapolated out of that? God's desires and God's actions are identical. It just follows. God is identical to his desires. God is identical to his actions. Therefore, his desires are identical to his actions. I don't know that this gets caught right away.
Those things are just foundational to all of reality.
Sure, I just want to finish though. I mean, presumably there has to be some explanation because you're saying there's no brute fact. Presumably there has to be some explanation as to why God created the universe with one tree there as opposed to no trees or two trees. And if there is some explanation, like God had the desire to create the universe such that there is one tree there as opposed to 0 or 2, well, what explains God's desire? Did he have the desire to create two trees? Did he have the desire to have the desire to have the desire to have two trees? I mean, it seems like it's either just going to be chance, like God just happens to have this desire as opposed to not having that desire, or it's just going to be necessary, right?
Yeah, again, I'm going to explain this to you again,
can't-
Billy. You're having the improper conceptualization of God here. Okay, you're
Wouldn't we have to have the improper conceptualization of God being that we're finite human beings? This is something that Jrobin has never grasped either. If we are epistemologically limited, we cannot help but have a faulty conceptualization of God. Not we can't know his mind, right? Ultimately, that's mysterious. I don't know if Jrobin believes that, but plenty of other theologians and apologists do. But then on top of that, Jrobin is trying to explain God like he's like cracked open the case that he's in and is explaining, God's properties like he's explaining the internal workings of a PC. This doesn't make sense. Like, oh, you just have the wrong idea of how this works. See, this cable connects into this slot, and this port goes here, and then this array is routing out information over here like that. Cool. Where is Jrobin getting any of this? Like, is there a schematic section in certain Bibles that's left out of other ones? Like, you have to be a Christian for X amount of time before you get, the teacher's edition, which gives you a blueprint which shows you how God works, right? Like, I'm fascinated with where Jrobin can get this stuff from because these guys don't have the imagination to really entertain some of the really negative entailments of some of these theologies, but it doesn't prevent them from coming on here and just balls out telling people like you just don't understand God, right? Let me tell you the right way to conceptualize an ultimate omni-propertied being. All right. The one that's identical to his desires and his actions. So when Christians go on and talk about how everything works out according to God's plan, that not only was if everything works out according to God's plan, that is consistent with God's desire, which is identical with God. Also, that desire is identical with his actions. Therefore, everything that works out was what God wanted to happen and what God acted on to happen, which means everything bad too, all that incidental stuff. It was wrong that you murdered that child, but go tell the child's parents it was good. Your child has left this veil of tears and is in paradise with God, and this is all part of his plan. Remember, God is identical with his desires and with his actions. It doesn't take very much for these people to really put it together that God wanted their child dead and made sure that it happened. That just follows. Am I conceptualizing God incorrectly, Jrobin? Because I'm just kind of following what the words you use.
You're conceptualizing of God as though he exists within. I'm explaining it to you, Billy. You're having the conception of God wherein he exists within another realm. Like, for example, when you invoke chance, as though there are this realm in which God exists. God exists as one particular thing in that realm, amongst other things, amongst other, as you put them, possibilities. When that's simply not the case. Okay, God is going to be the metaphysical basis and grounds, the fundamental anchor point for all other states of affairs. Okay, so to invoke.
Which means he, by necessity, must also be the anchor point for everything evil that happens. If a state of affair is defined as a situation, meaning it's a truth, what do they call that? A truth bearer, right? And we talk about facts, which would be connecting that, right? And we'd be able to describe that. Absolutely everything is dependent upon God. Absolutely everything. So the one objective fact that we can know, right, of these universals that Jrobin claims are transcendentally provided for by this God, one of them is evil. And so he's right back in the same position that Darth is. God is ultimately responsible for evil. And, thanks to what Jrobin has laid out here, wants it and acts on it. He does it. Because he wants it, he's doing it. Action, desire are equal. He desired the Holocaust to occur, which means that's the same as his action. So he did it. And he can't fail in anything that he does, right? Now, if he's necessary, that means for some strange reason, all of these terrible things necessarily had to happen. Now, I'm not great at breaking down all the problems with necessitarianism, but it seems to me like Jrobin is getting stuck in necessitarianism at this point, right? This is starting to sound like the world that was created in its fallen state and with all this evil and stuff in tow had to be that way, right? Because it's part of God's plan. That means it was desired by God. That means it was done by God. And it had to be done that way because of God's transcendental necessity, as Jrobin puts it, which means he couldn't have done it another way, which means he doesn't have a choice. So there's lots of problems with what Jrobin's trying to do. And again, the reason that this is getting complicated is simply because Jrobin thinks that that physics or philosophy can simply be divided up into two kind of metaphysical stances. One where there's a creator God that makes sure that where he feels he understands there's a reason why things were done. Jrobin could, he couldn't give two shits about the how, right? As long as God tells him one way or the other. The how, the explanation for how could change every other day. He wouldn't care. He needs a why, right? And if you go to naturalistic explanations and stuff on the other side of things, he thinks, well, that entails a godless world. So it doesn't matter if empirical, the scientific methods, or any of these kinds of things can explain the how and the what and the when, measure it. He's missing the why. And because he's not getting an answer to the why, even an imaginary one, even a placeholder one, that worldview is inherently missing something. It's just catastrophically flawed as far as he's concerned. He thinks the absence of a God in that worldview automatically entails chaos and nihilism. And the reason that he assumes that is because the worldview that he's selected from, that he's pre-selected, has told him so. So the dude is captive to a narrative that, is, I think, fundamentally broken.
Things that are independent of God, that in a realm external to God, that God is beholden to and that he exists in, is faulty, because that's not the proper conceptualization of God. Yes, it is. When you invoke things like chance and that there's some sort of randomness aspect to that, that is a improper conceptualization of God.
Okay. So you're saying that God's desires are necessary. They can't have been any other way. That God had to have had the desire to create that tree there. It can't have been.
I'm not saying anything about necessity. I'm saying that God, you're not able to. You're not. Listen.
Or necessary or something else.
Okay. Are you gonna listen? Are you gonna understand what I'm telling you?
It sounds like Jrobin's already trying to dodge the necessity part. It's entailed with this. I don't understand why Jrobin is. Well, I do understand why he wants to dodge it, because if I was trying to argue this point and someone like Billy was like, "Oh, okay, well, are you talking about necessity?" That will entail a commitment from Jrobin, and in my experience, guys like Jrobin avoid commitment, even in a conversation, possibly even in other aspects of it. No, I'm just kidding. It's just needlessly mean, but maybe. Sorry.
You. When you tell me that there are these other realms, or that there are these other worlds that God exists within, okay, or that the God exists within some sort of external, which is what you're implying here when you invoke this kind of things.
I never said anything like that.
Okay, so God, there is no. So let's be clear then. Let's be clear. When you talk about God, when I talk about God, okay, particularly the Christian God, we're not going to conceptualize him as though he is yet another creature that's subject to things that you may think that us as creatures are subject to.
Okay, then he's not subject to the things that we would think other. All right, Jrobin. So in order to get a conceptualization of this particular God, why did you say that he's identical to his desires and his actions, right? That might actually be even more meaningless now. Because before, I think it was committing into some entailments he wasn't going to be able to deal with or really fully unpack. But now, okay, this thing doesn't have anything close to being any of the motivations that we would normally ascribe to a human being or any other kind of creature. All right, what's the why? If God is providing the why for the universe and the world and intelligibility and all the things in it, he's now deleting it as an explanation for that in order to defend himself against Billy. I think this is sad.
That's not going to be the case. God is foundational. He's ultimate to all of reality, and the basis why anything is at all, or can be, or cannot be.
That's fine, but look, the question was very specific. It was you said that there's no brute facts. I said, what is the explanation as to why God had the desire to create the universe with one tree that I'm looking at as opposed to 0 or 2? And you said that it's not chance. So I'm asking the question, is God's desire to create the tree there as opposed to not create the tree? They're necessary, i.e. that it can't have been any other way. Or could God have changed his desire somehow? Like, what explains?
No, God does not
desire?
change God does not change his desires.
So it's
Okay?
necessary. His desires are necessary.
I'm closer to a position of necessitarian when it comes to the result of God's action. Okay, that when it comes to the fact that there is a tree in the forest, or how many trees are in the forest, that the amount of trees that are there necessarily are there. That's a position that I am leaning towards.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
that's not a statement about. That's not a statement about that doesn't necessarily equate to God in all circumstances.
It would. It would have to. I don't understand. Oh yeah, I'm leaning towards it being necessary that the number of trees in that particular forest would have to be that way and no other way. That makes if Jrobin has already forgotten the other aspect of God that he holds to, the one that he didn't explicitly bring up, I think, in the beginning of this conversation. God is the foundation for and the sustaining force for all of reality. So, yeah, if and that sustaining force means there's actions being done by this particular God, and according to Jrobin, his actions are identical to his desires, and he can't fail. So it follows that everything that is the result of his actions, which are his desires, which can't fail. Everything is exactly the way he wants it. So it has to be the case. If there's 57 trees in that glade, then that's what God wanted, and it necessarily had to be that way because God. This to me is fascinating. Like the dude has been talking out of his ass for so long, he can't even follow the entailments of the shit that he shoveled out at the beginning of this. Like this is classic Jrobin here.
Necessarily.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think that position entails necessitarianism. I think. Wait, sorry. You said you were a necessitarian?
That's the position I'm leaning towards.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think a lot of Muslims hold that position as well. I also wanted to ask you one question, then I probably got to go. Do you think there's a contradiction entailed in saying that physical material exists and God doesn't exist?
Physical material?
Yeah, do you think there's a contradiction in saying that physical material exists and God doesn't exist?
Yeah, well, you're not invoking any sort of ultimate, are you?
I'm just saying that there are physical material. Let's just say a rock, right? There's a world in which
Yeah,
a rock
in such a
exists,
world, you can't.
nothing
Yeah, so
else
if there's nothing that's foundational and ultimate, okay, that is revelatory, and the other properties of the Christian God, then no,
There are no
such a
minds in
worldview
this universe.
would not possibly be invocable, because
What?
again, there is not a foundational basis for within which intelligibility can be invoked, that can actually be actual, because
All I'm
what
saying,
you're talking about is a world wherein there is nothing that is tying any of the facts together. There's no world where you can say that physical material, and you can collectivize, you know, what you call physical material into the label of as physical material. There's nothing that you would have a
What?
basis by which you could even invoke that kind of a world.
I don't understand what any of that shit means. Like J. Robin is literally, I mean, he's just dribbling grease at this point. That's just bullshit. Jack writes, will J. Robin try to split up God's will into parts to get around this problem? And will he forget about divine simplicity in the process? Tune in to find out. Yeah. J.L. Warren, J. Robin worships the God of exceptions. God is responsible for everything, except that. God desires everything, except that. All things are God's intention, except that. Yeah, through God, all things are possible, but not that. No, don't ask for that. I always love that. I think there was like a comic with that, like, if I ask God, the kid asked, like, if I ask God for things, will he grant them? Well, you know what it says. The good book says that through God, all things are possible. Okay, good. I need him to kill, Jimmy Peterson over there. No, oh, no, no. What are you saying? It's not possible? Well, God, God could kill Jimmy Peterson. God could kill a million Jimmy Petersons. God has killed a million Jimmy Petersons.
okay. All I'm saying is that a world in which one rock exists and God doesn't exist does not entail a contradiction. That's all I'm saying, and I'm just wondering if you think it does entail a contradiction.
Well, you're not able to invoke that world. There's no, you're not even able to invoke it. That's not a.
What does that mean to invoke it? Right? Like he's not conjuring it up. He's only bringing. At this point, he's only bringing it up as a hypothetical. Right? He's asking him like, okay, let's say you have a world with physical matter. It sounds to me like J. Robin is kind of answering his question, but he can't provide the actual contradiction. So if you have a world with physical matter of any kind, let's say this particular world only has one source of physical matter and it's just a rock. What is can that world not exist, without a God? Is there a contradiction to that particular world? Even a universe that consists of just one stone needs an ultimate being in order to make that stone possible. And what's the contradiction if if that being is missing? Where do things break down? And hear what J. Robin's saying. Well, Billy, you can't even begin to invoke that. Why not?
A world that could even be stipulated.
So, there is a logically possible world in which a rock exists and God doesn't exist. There we go. I just invoked it. What's the contradiction?
No, there's no intelligibility in such a world because there's nothing that's foundational that would actually tie it together. The fact that you're
Yeah, he's trying to say, well, there's no intelligibility in that world. There's no minds in the world that Billy is presenting as a hypothetical. There's just physical matter, no minds. So no intelligibility needs to be discussed. So where's the contradiction there, J. Robin?
you're telling no by intelligibility we're saying that there is an actual foundational parameter or set of parameters that exist wherein it is the actuality of that state of affairs is actually tied to something, that there's something metaphysically primary by which that rock actually is that
So in a universe, so God could create a universe in which the only physical matter is a rock. The only physical thing in it is a rock, but it would still be intelligent if he beamed some humans over there. Is that essentially what he's saying? Like none of this makes any sense. All of this is useless. Hive science. This is from Bree Jefferson. Your friend Jill is super scared of girls. One, you're absolutely correct. Two, calling him my friend is super hurtful. Bree. That man hates my guts. But he does not like doesn't like girls. He's very much against women. which is why, any of his transphobic tendencies, it's like, he's like, well, I'm not for the LGBTQ community, especially the trans part of that community. I'm like, of course you're not, like, but what's interesting, I suspect though that he might sympathize with no, he doesn't. He doesn't. I think like women that want to become men. I thought he would be like, well, I understand that because being a man is the greatest. Like that seems like the kind of stupidity that he would advertise. But no, he hates everybody pretty much equally. Um, even Christians. Like it seems to me like the only Christians he seems to like are the ones that are almost as obnoxious as he is. So yeah, he's cancer.
They can be called a rock, for example. So, for example, if I tell you, let's just use the God example. Okay. So when I say that in this world as a Christian, I exist, you exist, the rocks, the trees, the moon, the stars exist. Well, that's only viable. That invocation of that state of affairs is only viable because God exists first. Right?
Okay, epistemologically or ontologically, Jrobin, what are you talking about? Because God gave us those things, we can talk about them, or because God gave us subjective experiences and sense perceptions, we're able to make some kind of sense out of them and then share that experience with each other, right? His answer? Well, both, of course. Okay, what about the universe where God just makes matter where there are no minds? Still, I don't think he's actually addressed this with Billy yet. Gorison Fay, I knew it. God is a Windows user. No wonder this world is so fucked up. Consider that, though, everyone. God is revealing his creation to us, and he's using StreamYard to do it with all of its audio problems. And really, those problems exist on Windows and on Mac. StreamYard has managed to make a product that is equally bad in almost every platform. Maybe it works great on a Chromebook, but my guess is it doesn't. The universe could consist of absolutely nothing but a rock, and I still think it would be more intelligible than Jrobin. Yeah, at times. Yeah. Someone should actually do that just to get snotty with them. Like, well, there'd be no intelligibility. Well, you're not intelligible to me right now. So what explains that?
Right. So then we exist in a world wherein everything exists because of God. There is a final reference point to those things. So when I can speak about the rocks, the moon, the trees, the stars, etc., that I'm actually talking about fundamentally what it depends upon. And
okay, unless they're not really there. This is God the solipsist, and you subscribe to his crazy worldview, right? Like, if you're a solipsist and you think that everything is a product of the interior workings of your mind, then everything that happens after you've had that reached that conclusion, reinforces that conclusion. And the kind of God that Jrobin is talking about, at least epistemologically, acts this way, right? To the point where we're supposed to accept it, right? Everything that happens in the world happens because God, allows it to happen, right? Everything is evidence for God. Cool. All right. Let's just say that that's how it is, right? That's the way that God experiences the universe that he created. It came out of his head. Everything that happens. So just think about that. God is just a solipsist. Everything that happens in the universe is a manifestation of God's mind. And everything that continues to happen is just further evidence of the fact that God's mind is necessary in order for that stuff to continue to manifest, even as it changes and grows. But that leads to some really dark places. Like that means that God's mind is as responsible for the emergence of the bad as well as the good. Right? Which these guys will just end up saying, well, without God's mind, we wouldn't have the ability to make any kind of objective sense of what is objectively good or objectively bad. Well, okay. But if both are just products of a mind of God, and you've defined that God as omnibenevolent, there's no such thing as anything bad coming from that mind. It can't. It's an omnibenevolent being. So everything that emerges from its mind is good. How do we have free will in this particular universe? Anything that we would do would be a manifestation of God's will, of God's mind, right? He's the solipsist God. So I just, again, I really feel like, I feel like if Jrobin and company, if any of these guys got together, if any of them had just a little bit more imagination, they could probably craft some pretty freaky episodes of Black Mirror, but it won't happen.
world wherein nothing is foundational or ultimate, there is no relationship or connectivity between any facts. So it wouldn't be possible for you to say that such a thing exists without that.
I mean, I
That
didn't
rocks
hear a
exist without that.
contradiction there.
That's interesting. Ronnie D, 1970, just finished the Reformed Apologetics course on Van Til theology taught by Dr. Lane Tipton. Covered Voss, is it Babnik or was it Bonnick? Probably Bonnick. Warfield, Hegel, etc. It was eye-opening on how ridiculous the precept argument is. How long was that course, Ronnie? I'm kind of interested in it. I think it was the he hasn't been on here a while, but Jedi. Was it Jedi? I can't remember what he calls himself. But I think he had sent some links along about some courses that you could do on something like that, and I think I forgot about them. I didn't get around to taking one of them. I can't remember if they were courses or if they were seminars. If you have those, I don't know. I don't know if they cost money or not. Could you post the links in the chat? I'd be kind of interested in looking into those, seeing if those are. I will link it. It's free. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Let me take a look. I can't. I think it's Jedi John Piper. That's his username. I don't know if you got those from him when he shared them, but I think he did.
So I think my claim holds. There's no contradiction, but
No, there's no rocks to speak of. There would be no trees to speak of. There would be no grass to speak of. No, you're saying rock, but I'm saying it when you actually when you investigate the world,
He can't do this. Like Billy's talking about a world where there are no minds, there's just physical matter. And Jrobin can't stop talking about minds investigating it.
the world that you're talking about to invoke physical material, to invoke any sort of material at all without the foundational reference point of that which is ultimate, then no, because you're invoking relationships without there being a basis for relationships between any state of affairs. You're invoking particular things and groups of things without there being any basis for those kind of things.
But there would be. Like this doesn't make any sense. Like this is essentially he's still just barely getting to where Billy's trying to go with this. The question was like, so the contradiction with a world where there's physical matter and no God is that if there was no God and there's a world with physical matter, there'd be no intelligibility, even though that world doesn't have minds. So his contradiction is that in that world there would be no intelligibility, even though that world lacks minds. So he can't even track this. This is remarkably bad.
So you wouldn't be able to invoke a rock in such a world. It's only because you exist within a world that God does exist and that you can actually invoke these things that you're trying to posit the hypothetical wherein God doesn't exist and these things still exist. But in reality, those things would not exist. That world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at this point, and I got to give Billy credit. I don't know if he like just starts every day with a giant bowl of weed or what, but he's got the patience of a saint here. Not to invoke that, but Alex J and Trump feeling the sting, just beautiful. Yeah, well, thank you very much for the super chat, 420 atheist. I appreciate it. An Australian $2. I do like the Australian monies. I don't know why. Yeah, I heard that Mar-a-Lago was raided. Feds raided it, maybe cracked a safe. Interesting stuff. Very weird. I'm wondering if Rebuke and Reprove, who's a big lie proponent, he still holds on to that whole the election was stolen and all this nonsense. I wonder how I haven't seen him do videos where he's reacted to this. He hasn't done any coverage on the January 6th committee, at least not that I've heard of. I think one or two of his more recent videos keep getting pulled because he keeps getting into the big lie crap. So, yeah, thank you again for that super chat. I appreciate it. Still waiting for that argument that explains why disembodied mind is necessary to unify particulars. Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Hey, Pat, how's it going? God is a mind. Humans have minds. Therefore, God created humans because only minds can create a mind. Checkmate, atheist. Yeah, that's about it. They wouldn't have raided if they didn't know exactly what they were going in for, especially with it being unannounced. Yeah, you're probably right. But over the last few years, there have been reasons to doubt the efficacy and competence of our FBI from time to time. They've been very careful with this one, and I think, to go to your point, generally, if you're going to do a raid like that on information, you'd want to know, you'd want to know for certain that you were going to be able to grab whatever was there. They're serving a warrant on a former president, which I think is unheard of. Definitely unheard of in modern times. I don't know if anything, in our past, we had a president who had some law enforcement come in and, bust up their stuff. But yep, it's interesting. Hello, Christina Rain. Good to see you. Thanks for showing up here.
The world would not exist.
There are no minds in this world. It's just
That's irrelevant. I'm not talking about a mind. We're talking about the fact that the state of affairs itself possesses intelligibility. And by intelligibility, we're saying that there is a ultimate state of affairs or an ultimate reference point for everything that does exist.
Is there a contradiction there?
Yeah, I think I explained it. What we're not talking, or sorry, the world that you're talking about could only exist in a world where there's something foundational and ultimate, because you're invoking relationships between facts, wherein relationships are not grounded by anything, so that there would be no relationships. Everything would just be spontaneous and out of chance. But you are invoking things as though they're not.
Are you saying the contradiction is there is something fundamental and there isn't something fundamental?
Your invocation of any state of affairs presupposes that there's something that's fundamental, that's revelatory, that has all the properties of the Christian God, and it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm denying that exists in this logically possible.
Yeah, so then you have no basis then to invoke that those things exist, because any invocation of fact.
So even as a hypothetical, I mean, it kind of sounds like Jrobin's ruling out the possibility of entertaining a hypothetical without a God. This is kind of stunning.
All I'm saying is that
depends upon the Christian God.
All I'm saying
no, because again, I'm explaining to you, any invocation of facts depends upon the Christian God.
Look, I'm using the classical laws of logic, right? Now, if you
did you not understand what I said, Billy?
Give me a second, Jay. So,
did you understand? I want to make sure we're clear here before we move on. Did you understand what I said?
So, on top of using the phrase, you're on a very short leash, which is the reason for that particular thumbnail. I should apologize. That's from a scene from Pulp Fiction, which is the least kid-safe aspect of Pulp Fiction, which is probably saying something. But this idea where these guys get pissed off and get aggressive in their conversations and then have to repeatedly ask, did you understand me? Did you understand me? The easiest way, I think, to answer this is not a criticism of Billy or a point or a tip or anything either, because I think Billy does much better in these conversations than I do. At this point, I probably would have blown a gasket and called Jrobin a fucking asshole like 19 times and then gotten kicked, because Jrobin also hates my guts and the feeling's mutual. But if you have to ask that many times, you know damn well nobody understands what the fuck you're talking about, right? I find it stunningly stupid at this point so Ronnie in the chat was just mentioning that he could go to I think it's part of the Reformed Church, right? And do these seminars for free, right? These online classes that sort of introduce Reformed theology and presuppositional apologetics. You can do that for free, right? For anybody that's watching this now and anybody that watches it later, think about this. How many Christians in these types of environments, in these types of conversations, because there are a lot of apologists, wannabe apologists and Christians talking on these kinds of things. How often are they sharing resources on their theology and on their stuff? To anyone that is willing to listen. Now, I know that Darth Dawkins is willing to share, usually I think kind of cribbed, PDFs and stuff. But the only time I see him ever sharing those things out with anybody, he shares them with other Christians. Oftentimes with Christians where he disagrees with them on some point of doctrine or something like that, because he shared stuff out with with Tangelo and others in the past. So I know about this. But these guys are kind of comfortable with the fact that presuppositional apologetics is, for them, this knockdown, drag out, the blue ribbon end all be all of any apologetic going. And the less atheists understand about it, the better for the purposes of these discussions. But then they have the temerity to then ask in this aggrieved, condescending way, do you understand what I'm talking about? The safe answer is, ain't nobody understand what you're talking about. No one understands the words coming out of your mouth most of the time, because it's not philosophy. It's some philosophy that was run over like roadkill and then scraped up with a snow shovel and then taken back and turned into some kind of a meal later on. That's usually what this is. And so even if you try to track some of the stuff back, either through what I've attempted to, like Bonson or Van Til, if you just try to track it back, like where were they getting this stuff? How were they reaching these conclusions? You can't find those guys mapping out how they got their theology from the philosophical influences and readings they were doing. And so it just sort of gets lost. Then they just run off, and then they got their fan fiction, the theology, where they explain, well, it has to be this way. That gets disseminated. That gets interpreted, pamphletized, summarized, condensed, and then squirted into the eyes and minds of these guys, who then just repeat it, because, maybe these guys got like a little bit of a boot camp, like the type that Seitan Bruggencate used to run. Remember, precept is about shutting mouths. So talk like this and say these things and just tell them that there isn't anything. This is basically just the same as there has to be a God, otherwise nothing. And if the fact that you're even talking to me right now means there's a God. Okay. It would be just as easy. Danny just did this in a video that Clubhouse just dropped. He just did this to Mac, who's a relatively new preceptor, where he basically just makes this argument again and again. And every time Matt brings up an objection, Danny just reminds him that every time he speaks, he is affirming and presupposing Allah, the God of Islam. And he just keeps repeating this over and over and over. He didn't start that way. It's a pretty good video. I'll probably review it. But that's all you have to do. You just remind every time you talk, every time you blink, every breath you take. I'm going to try not to get into other Sting songs and police tunes, but all of it is evidence for God. All of it is, every time you do that, you're affirming the existence of that particular God, the Christian God. The weakness with the argument is that anybody from any belief stance, including a pantheist, can say the same thing. You could do the exact same thing. It wouldn't change a damn thing.
Maybe not really, but
Okay, then I have to explain it, because then if you're going to just go on without actually understanding what I said, then there's no point in why are you speaking? Because you didn't understand what I said, so you're not actually responding to what I said. Okay?
It just seems
I'm
like
going to make
you're
this
not
clear again.
responding to what I'm
Whenever a state of affairs, whenever a fact is invoked, whenever it is stipulated to be real, what is also invoked is the preconditions for those things. Okay? Anytime you invoke a fact, you're also going to be invoking things like relationships between facts. Okay? You're going to be invoking unity. You're going to be invoking diversity of things. All of those things presuppose and have as a precondition God being that which is foundational, ultimate, revelatory, always truth revealing, etc. Okay? What you're trying to do is positing a world where these proximate facts exist and possess intelligibility, but God does not exist. Okay, so what you're left with is a world that is out of pure chaos, out of pure brute chance and randomness, out of a metaphysical void, and you're expecting me to accept that you can have rocks and trees and in continuity and relationships between facts when you simply don't. There is no basis for that. Such a thing would not exist.
Yeah, you would, because the facts. Let's see. Why would that be a problem, right? Let me take a look at something here, because my brother was putting this in the chat. State of affairs aren't facts. Facts communicate state of affairs. States of affairs. Yeah. I think this is kind of odd because one of the things that these guys like to talk about is like, well, when you invoke facts, that's one of Dorothy Pooh's favorites. Um, the idea behind it is that when you try to do that, what you're buried within that is the source of that fact. Well, yeah, right. But if a fact is explaining a state of affairs, right? I mean, even if we take it out of the realm of sort of like philosophy of truth or philosophy of language, let's just think about what we're talking about, right? If when I say a fact, I'm not invoking the authority of a fact, right? It's a fact if what I'm saying describes an actual state of affairs, and that would be that state of affairs should obtain a fancy philosophical term for it should be actually be a thing, whether my mind was there or not, whether I saw it or not. Now, in this case, I happen to observe it, and then I can repeat it. I can make the observation. It rained on Tuesday, or something like that. That's a fact because that situation actually happened. I can make lots of other claims about things that may or may not be true, or maybe only true to a certain degree. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. And I really feel like when these guys start using the language like, well, when you invoke a fact, the idea of invoking in that language, one of them is to cite as an authority. And it's the only one that really works given the way that they're saying that sentence, right? But when you say a fact, the authority is not in the fact itself. Describing that statement as a fact just means that that statement represents an actual situation in the real world. So the authority is the situation, its interconnectedness to real observations and to real life. That's its ultimate authority. I thought these guys kind of understood this because the idea behind that was that, well, okay, so when you say something is a fact, right, it depends on there actually being that situation. But why is that situation a fact? Well, because that was preceded by this thing. Okay, now why is that a fact? So you end up getting this infinite regress. So in order to short circuit this what these guys usually end up having a problem with is that induction makes them nauseated. They just decide to cut to the chase and be like, all of this stuff is dependent on God. And then they cut all those situations out. So every direct fact is dependent on God. They'd have fewer commitments if this fact depends on this fact, depends on this fact, depends on this fact, and then it goes back for a really long time, and then everything kind of terminates with God. I really think the deist position is actually putting up less crap and gets itself into less trouble. But what Darth and J. Robin have decided to do is that, okay, well, here's the thing, because God's ultimate and transcendent and not, and eternal and all this other kind of crap, um, he you don't have to go all the way back. He didn't just simply set everything in motion. He also sustains it, which means God is a one-to-one connection with every single fact that happens. Now that makes things really fucking dangerous, right? So God isn't responsible for setting all the contingent facts in motion that eventually led to the horrible tragedy that befell your child. God directly made sure that your child had that tragedy. I don't know if that's making any sense. I'll leave it at that. But I really think that's an entailment for what these guys are doing with some of these explanations when they're trying to talk about facts like this, and it makes me crazy.
And you wouldn't have a basis by which you can't even tell me how you do assume that those things would exist in such a world, but you're just stipulating them as though they do. And I'm telling you that you don't have a basis by which you can even posit that as a hypothetical scenario. That would be actual.
Okay. I mean, I got a meeting soon. But I mean, like, can we just get like a vote in the text chat? So one, if you
Yeah, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this, Billy. We're not going to do this vote in the text chat thing. Okay. Every time you do that, or if you do that again, we're not doing this. We're not playing that game. Okay.
Okay. Well, okay, we won't do that. But yeah, I mean, I'm saying that if you understand logically possible worlds as worlds in which all of the facts about that world don't contradict each other, namely that there's no contradiction, right? There's no, like, I'm walking down the street and it's not the case I'm walking down my street. Like, if we understand logically possible worlds like that, which most people do understand logically possible worlds like that, I'm saying that the world in which a rock exists and God does not exist doesn't entail a contradiction. And I don't I don't think you've demonstrated a contradiction. Right? You've talked about
Actually, I already
thought.
did. I already
What's
No, he didn't.
P and not P? What's the P and not P?
Yeah, that those things do exist and possess intelligibility, and that they don't. You're positing them as though they do, but
Okay.
it's entailed that they do not possess intelligibility. That there is nothing that's
Okay, so
foundational and ultimate that's going to secure that those things can actually be invoked.
So the intelligibility of things is built in them? What? Is that what he's saying? Like, maybe I've got this backward. Maybe this is the problem. I just assume intelligibility is something that we have, right? It's something that we can make use of, right? Intelligibility is just our ability to comprehend something out there, or even some kind of irrational kind of problem or whatever, right? Whether or not it's intelligible or not. The idea that a rock contains the property which makes it intelligible to me seems, what's the word I'm looking for? Fucked. Seems fucked. Thank you very much for the super chat, Pat. Great channel, Jefferson. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate the super chat. I try my best, even though lately it's been nothing but technical problems. I blame Microsoft and Apple and StreamYard, everyone but myself. It's the lesson I've been getting from listening to a lot of these Christian apologists online. I'm not responsible. It's everyone else.
all right. Well, maybe we might have to continue this later. But okay. So the contradiction. I'm just writing this down in text chat. So the contradiction is, the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess intelligibility.
So we've laid it out, right? So the P and not P. In one, the rock possesses intelligibility, and in the other world, the rock does not possess intelligibility. I'm interested in that other universe where there are rocks that are unintelligible. Ronald, I like you so much, Jefferson. I subbed you with both of my YT channels. Very unnecessary, but very much appreciated. Thank you. See, to everyone else, this is how it's done. Subscribe with your sock accounts. Get more sock accounts to subscribe. No, I'm just kidding. Do that. I appreciate that, Ronald. Thank you.
The rock possesses intelligibility.
I think I missed that part. A hypothetical that is actual, Jrobin 2022. Yeah, I think he did say that. There's nothing to really comment on that. That's just record it, frame it. Yeah.
So that's the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess in okay, cool. So there we go.
I'm surprised Jrobin wasn't giving him more of a hard time while he was kind of like writing that out. Possesses intelligibility does not like I thought that would drive him crazy. It probably did. Let's see what he sounds like when he comes back.
Hopefully my spelling's okay, but the contradiction is the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess intelligibility. So could you maybe present an argument as to show?
I already did, Billy.
What's
So
the premise
that's what I was asking if you understood. Remember when I asked you like 5 times? Do you understand what I'm telling you?
Yeah, but that was just you being aggressive and trying to be alpha, Jrobin. Like no, Billy clearly didn't take that personally. You know, he didn't accept that. Secular Pigmon, thank you very much for the super sticker. Thank you. Let's see, Hogtie. I should point this out too. I'm pretty sure Slack accounts don't count or get dropped off later now. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case too. Yeah. In years of talking with preceptors, each claiming to do internal critique of my worldview, I've literally not once ever had one point out the contradiction that they claim to exist. Yeah. Yeah. And Billy's kind of given this one to Jrobin, right? And it's not great, right? Like the contradiction is like, Well, the rock possesses intelligibility, or the rock does not possess intelligibility. I don't even know what that means. Yeah, the only contradiction is a conflict with their worldview. That's not internal critique. That's just them saying you're wrong. Yeah, and it comes to this is the problem that I had with Matt Slick's kind of thing, right? With Jeff Trimble, and I think Jeff Trimble did a good job keeping him on that, even especially because it was driving Matt Slick crazy. Was that Matt Slick is trying to do this thing where like, no, I'm going to go to your worldview where I'm going to try to figure out, I'm going to point out to you what your worldview is lacking. I already know what Matt Slick thinks my worldview is lacking. Jesus. Right. And then when he's going to point that out, like, well, you can't account for this and you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this, but my God can. And then when you ask them how and why, well, that's just how God does things. Oh, God provides for this and God reveals that and God provides this and God reveals that. And the intelligibility is provided for by God and it's revealed to us in such a way that we can know. None of this stuff has any explanatory power. None of this means a damn thing at all. Right. But they think they're super fancy trying to go at you and say, well, here's the thing. You need to provide me with a perfect schematic of how absolutely everything works all the time. And until you can, Jesus. And Jesus is the way and the solution. So don't you fret, little buddy. Don't have don't have a solution to hard solipsism? Jesus. Can't figure out the infinite regress problem of induction? Jesus. Just pop him in there and all those problems go away. Cool.
Okay, because in a world wherein God does not exist, in a world wherein God does not exist, you said you didn't understand, and then I explained it to you, and then I just explained it to you, and then you asked me again for the contradiction when I've made it clear about half a dozen times.
I'm just writing it down. So premise one is in a world where God doesn't exist. So this.
I like it when Billy does this, when he forces him to slow down so you can type this stuff out.
This is premise one. In a world where God doesn't exist, what's the rest of it?
What do you mean in a world? I didn't. What are you talking about? What are you asking me?
I asked you for premise one, and you started saying in a world where God doesn't exist.
We're talking about the fact that you don't understand. We're talking about the fact that you don't seem to understand the fact that God is required for intelligibility, and the world wherein you are saying that these rocks exist, that there is no intelligibility.
You didn't say anything about intelligibility, Jrobin. You did. He was talking about, he thought that the contradiction would be the possibility of a world that contains physical matter, but it wasn't created by a God, right? And then your automatic problem with this was that it lacks intelligibility somehow. The physical matter in that world lacks intelligibility versus physical matter that would have intelligibility, and somehow God grants that. God provides that necessary jump. Even though Billy was positing, was hypothetically stipulating to a possible world with physical matter that lacked minds. So intelligibility was still kind of irrelevant to that hypothetical. Jrobin is still kind of like triggered by that, apparently, right? Which is funny because now I know after this he's probably going around thinking that idiot Billy doesn't even understand like how rocks work, But at the same time, I'm wondering if Billy is walking around chuckling to himself, thinking like Jrobin thinks that the only reason we identify rocks as rocks is because they're transmitting intelligibility, like a Bluetooth signal that we can connect to. Thank you, Jeebus and Yahweh.
Okay, so look, let's just recapitulate. We got the contradiction, which is the rock possesses intelligibility and the rock does not possess intelligibility. So I'm asking you for the argument that shows that contradiction. So what's premise one?
Okay, I'll make this clear one last time.
So premise one is okay.
When you invoke.
Okay, now Billy seems like he's doing this just to tweak Jrobin a little bit.
Listen, Billy, I'm going to mute you in a second. You're not going to play this game, okay? In a world wherein when you're talking about the facts that are stipulated to exist, facts that are proximate or facts that are temporal facts, okay? Every time you invoke a fact, every time you invoke a fact, every time you invoke a fact of that nature, you're going to be invoking what is required for that. Okay. In this case,
Right, which would be the actual situation that the fact represents.
we're talking about something being
Is
foundational,
this still
something that's being
constant?
found, something that's ultimate, that is going to secure all states of affairs. Okay.
So in
So
a world where facts,
And keep in mind, the reason that he thinks that that needs to happen is because he's trying to head off a problem where somebody just says, "Well, the fact the fact represents the actual, a state of affairs, right?" I mean, I don't know that that's actually the way philosophers would put it, especially philosophers of language, but I think based on how J. Robin and Darth Dawkins lay this out, right? Like, I think most people intuit the idea. If you say something, well, hey, it's a fact that so and so robbed a liquor store, right? Why would you say it that way? It's a fact because it, that represents an actual state of affairs, right? It's provable, demonstrable, measurable, testable, and in a way repeatable. It's on video. We can watch it all the time. The guys on cops. But for whatever reason, that the fact that this person actually robbed a liquor store, that is the foundation for the fact that we're talking about. And you don't have to invoke the authority of facts, whatever that means, right? It's not coming from an authority. It's just corresponding to something that actually occurred. But for J. Robin, right, he doesn't want it to be connected. He doesn't want facts to be connected to just situations that occur because then that could be too chaotic, right? There has to be a God that's responsible for all that. And this is where I start thinking like it's not enough for God to be the foundation for the first fact that set everything in motion, right? Because that's too deistic. God is behind directly, one degree removed from every fact, the direct source and foundation behind absolutely everything, which is kind of dangerous if you stop and think about it. Now, maybe he would reject that. I don't know. J. Robin, if you're watching this, reach out to me. Comment section's always open, bud.
every time you
So
invoke a
don't
fact,
listen. I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Why are you talking when I'm speaking?
because I'm trying to write it down
So
because I didn't understand it last time.
so
So
I'll wait until you're. I'm just gonna wait until you're done talking.
okay,
Okay.
cool.
So in a
I wrote
world,
down
That would be polite, J. Robin.
in a world where I thought you were going to wait until I was done.
okay,
Look,
we're not
I
playing this
don't know
game.
if this how y'all normally do it, but I'm trying to hear what the brother's saying, and I can't really pay attention if you keep mimicking everything he's saying after he's saying it.
Yeah, because it's a trolling tactic. That's what it is, and I've gotten impatient with it. Okay. So for the benefit of the audience, I'll be clear again. Okay, just for the benefit of the audience, when you're invoking a fact, when you say, okay, the rock exists, there's physical matter, okay, in the world, there's anything at all, okay, what you're going to be doing, you're going to be saying that there is a relationship between facts. Okay, you're in.
Big deal. Nobody has a problem with the idea that there's a relationship between facts. Justin, thank you very much for the super chat. Someone should ask J. Robin if thinks that if he believes there's a deer in his yard, that there is in fact necessarily a deer in his yard. Yeah. I would like to be a fly on the wall to hear discussion between J. Robin and Darth Dawkins, sort that out. Because that seems like the kind of thing like maybe some of these guys have had these discussions, absent the possibility of a skeptic audience. And like to hear these guys tear into each other about some of this. Like, I can't imagine these guys getting that sorted out. Especially when Darth is running around like, well, belief and knowledge. There's no real difference. Uh, thank you again, Justin, for that super chat. Appreciate it. Yeah, attempting trolling tactic. It's a trolling tactic if you attempt to write down a person's what you think might be a person's attempt to lay out something as a deductive syllogism, or to help them get a deductive syllogism running. Right? Like J. Robin couldn't articulate what the P and not P was until he just got angry and just happened to blurt out like, "Well, because it lacks intelligibility." And then Billy helpfully was like, "Okay, so that's the contradiction. The rock has intelligibility or the rock lacks intelligibility. There's the contradiction." And then Jerome, oh yeah. Notice we didn't hear him say, "Thanks, Billy. Thanks for working that out for me." Instead, Young comes in here, blames Billy for over talking, of all things, which, Young, way to go. Way to, very astute, my dude. And I will admit, I mean, Billy, that one little comment that Billy made, that probably was just to get under J. Robin's skin, but it was worth it. So salute, Billy.
Invoking that you can even utter the sentence, that the sentence is coherent, right? Additionally, what you're doing is you're invoking unity, you're invoking diversity of things, you're invoking, even if you're invoking just one thing and you're labeling it as a rock, well, what you're doing is you're taking it from a class of things that you're calling rocks. And because there's a commonality between certain things, and because you conceptualize a rock as always a member of a class of things that you call rock, that you can even call it a rock. Okay, let me say that again. The reason, or the fact that you're calling it a rock presupposes that there is a class of things called rock, or there's a group of objects that you conceptualize as rocks that you call rocks, that you can now invoke a singular object as a rock. Okay, that there's a relationship between those things. Okay, ultimately speaking, okay, you're going to be invoking a world as though there is a coherence, that there's an order, that there are relationships, again, as I keep saying, between facts. Okay, that there is a coherence between facts, and that you can invoke many things, and that those things have coherence between them. Okay, if you're doing that, again, you're going to be accounting.
This is a really long-winded way of saying God did it. He's necessary for it. And any of y'all want to tell me that it's otherwise, you're all lying. That's all I'm hearing from him. And I'm not hearing an actual argument. I'm just hearing it has to be this way or else. Bad things, chaos, nihilism, meaninglessness. Oh God, panic attacks. Just Jesus.
Or you're going to have to account for the preconditions of those things.
The preconditions of what? The facts that represent situations, and then the other facts that preceded those facts. I don't think a lot of people have a problem with that, right? The only people that have problems with this are these goofballs that have seen too many pastors and apologists go off on these goofy little riffs where, you know what, induction leads to sanity, you know. It's just turtles all the way down. Have you ever heard of anything? Have you ever seen anything so scary? That's where this comes from. It's all a turtle phobia. I'm going to read this one out loud first because this was good. The Rock says you can take that intelligibility, turn that some bit sideways, and shove it away. Wrong, Rock. Thank you, AJ, for that. Ben guys, a question for Jeff. If you were an FBI agent raiding Trump's place, would you do anything to his toothbrush? And if so, what? Strange question, but I'll entertain it, Benghazi, because it's you. First of all, I don't think there is a toothbrush, right? I'm pretty sure all of his teeth are fake, full set dentures. So he's probably got one of those big glasses where he drops his chompers in, with the Mentadent or whatever not Mentadent. I think that's the bonding agent, but you know what I mean. And drops them in there. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. I would take those teeth because you usually got more than one set. So if I saw a set in there, I'd keep them. But yeah, I don't think there's a toothbrush to actually abuse. But oh yeah, I'll get them chompers.
And if you're doing that, if you're accounting for the preconditions of those things, the precondition for that needs to be that there's something that's foundational that those things depend upon. Otherwise,
yeah, what's foundational to the fact of the situation, the actual situations that it describes, right? That's just kind of working through the epistemology. If he wants to get into the ontology kind of thing, like what makes these situations possible? Well, there's lots of naturalistic explanations for how those things occurred, agents acting, naturalistic processes, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why would they happen that way? Well, that's different, and that who knows, right? That's a bigger question, right? For J. Robin, it needs to be a why. But now he's made everything else is dependent on the same thing. The same thing that he insecurely, the insecurity that's driving him to seek out any possible explanation. He needs the why answered. And so it must be Jesus, it must be God, it must be the Christian God. Okay, fine, great, right? But now he's made this God responsible for the fact that I bought a chocolate ice cream cone instead of a vanilla one. Right? That's where he's going with this, right? God is responsible for all this stuff. His desires and his actions, they are identical. His will not, his will and his desire are one and the same. He is identical with these things, and he can't fail. So the fact that I'm an atheist is God's will.
If that's not the case, what you're talking about is a world wherein everything, like ultimately, what's out there is nothingness. It's just a brute, or it's just a like a void, a metaphysical void or metaphysical vacuum, where everything that happens, everything that comes into existence, that could be said to come into existence, I'll say, putatively, is just out of random chance. It's out of brute chance. It's just there is no connectivity between the facts, which would annihilate the ability for rationality, amongst other things, but also for that state of affairs to be actual.
Okay, so you wouldn't be able to make sense out of anything, and the situation wouldn't be able to happen in the first place. So, what difference would it make if I'd be able to make sense of it or not? There wouldn't be anything for me to make sense of. This just goes back to the problem that Darth would constantly bring up. Well, if there's no God, you wouldn't be able to make sense of anything. No, you ding dong. There wouldn't be anything based on the God you're talking about. Why do you keep talking about us not being able to make sense of a world without God when the world that you're positing, that this worldview that you have, it's necessarily entailed from the God that you've defined that there is nothing without him. Don't tell me like, well, that's why you have any intelligibility at all. That's why there's anything at all, right? I think that's why these guys have no problem conflating ontology and epistemology so shamelessly, because it's just all Jesus. It has to be. Everything's God. He's the one that makes everything work. And without him, you're just shit out of luck, I'd be talking to somebody that is just saying the letter K for 14 hours straight. But no, that's not what you'd get. We would cease to be. So just knock that shit off. The entailment going back from any of this kind of stuff, if you really wanted to get into this, is why is it that this God, the God that J. Robin is describing, is now directly responsible for every single fucking fact that happens all the time, instead of just being initially responsible for setting into motion a natural world in which facts follow facts, events follow events, and we describe them as facts and as states of affairs and whatever. But no, now that's not good enough for J. Robin. The fact that Paris has an Eiffel Tower is directly responsible. God is directly responsible for that. It didn't just roll out that way, right? Until you run into a situation where things are bad. God cannot be directly responsible for the Holocaust because that's a no-go zone for these guys. It follows from what J. Robin's saying, but he's not going to want that. So what's he going to talk about then? That's the result of events occurring based on human free will. As if human free will is somehow independent of God's actions and desires. How could they be? Everything that happens for God's reason. Everything occurs according to his plan. And yet we have the capacity to set events in motion independent of his desires somehow. And God's not responsible for those things. So when you ask for a fact that's not predicated on that God, evil. Anything fucking evil that we do. J. Robin is, at the end of the day, a moral objectivist. He believes in moral facts. He believes in an objective sense of evil. But I can't believe he can't see the contradictions in his own worldview. Fucking nuts.
Because there is no connectivity between anything. You couldn't even be said to have states of affairs in a coherent fashion.
Hey, Goofus, you're an atheist. I don't expect you to say it.
Jesus. So yeah, that's it. That's it for that one. So unfortunately, I engaged, I think, too much with J. Robin's, too much of what J. Robin was attempting to argue, but it was mostly because Billy, I think, was really trying to get into the nitty gritty of his argument. That being said, J. Robin is not a good person, and yeah, he sucks to talk to. He's a shitty conversationalist. He's a reactionary goon. Yeah. I don't mean reactionary in the sense that like politics. I don't know how right wing the guy is, although I'm assuming, given some of the companies hanging around with, he's probably basically like some Christian nationalist autocrat, but or autocrat wannabe. I wanted to highlight this. Thank you for that, Justin. That toothbrush comment reminds me of a South Park episode, but I think an upper decker would have been the pro move. No, I kind of feel like what's the raccoon in Rocket in Guardians of the Galaxy, where he's always trying to collect. If somebody has like a prosthetic or a cybernetic piece, he just wants to collect it. That would be my thing. If I saw Trump dentures, yeah, yep, mine. They'd be gross, but then I could wait later on and be like, yeah, I had 45's teeth. All right, folks. That's it for that. Thank you, everybody, for the live chat. As always, it's always fun. I was going to bring my brother in here for a bit, but I think he probably got pulled away. He was kind of in the background for a little bit, but had to take off. Let me highlight this before I go. Hello, Devious Chris. Jrobin almost said brute fact, but even taking Darth's spiel regarding sets, there is a set of divine beings, Trinity, making them part of existence and not external to the whole. Okay. Here we go. So his desires have to be secondary to a brute fact. So his deities have to be secondary to a brute fact. Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah, that could be. Well, folks, I'm going to wrap it up there. I've been streaming a lot because I'm been trying to catch up. Next time I stream, it might be with another laptop. I gotta just like pick my hardware and stick with it, and not base it on whether or not I can stream with this, or I need to start streaming with OBS. I don't know if that's going to make things better or worse, but I have had it with StreamYard. StreamYard is a pile. So, but that's too depressing. So, thank you all for super stickers. Especially SPM, she posted one of those. Thank you all again for your super chats, Justin, and I know I'm going to forget somebody if I try to go through it, but and Pat and others. Thanks for the comments as usual. I'll probably be streaming again. I got a few more that I want to get done to kind of get caught back up, and there's going to be some new ones coming out for Clubhouse debates that I'll be covering as well. So I'll keep rolling as long as I'm in the mood to do it. So thank you all for coming. Take care, and I will see everybody next time. If anyone is interested in any comments, any show ideas, anything like that, please email.